Thank you, Lily, for reading. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Lead us not into temptation. These are the words that come at the close of the Lord's Prayer that Jesus gives to his disciples as the last thing to say when they pray. Remember, his disciples went to him and said, Lord, teach us to pray. We don't know how to do it like you know how to do it. So God gives them a wonderful model. Our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And we've been taking it piece by piece because most of us, even if we've never stepped foot inside of a church, are very familiar with this Lord's Prayer. We've heard it, we've probably said it. And with familiarity can come apathy. We're saying it so many times we can lose sort of the efficacy of it, the power of it. But Jesus gave us this very simple prayer. And what we're doing each week, of course, is walking through the biblical foundation behind each phrase. And today we get to the lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And this psalm, Psalm 51, is probably the most famous psalm of what they call a psalm of guidance. It's the psalm of somebody praying, and we'll get to who that person is, for guidance in the midst of temptation. Somebody who's praying, literally, almost the words, God lead me, God deliver me. God, something's not right in my life right now. What am I going to do about it? This Psalm 51 is he's seeking guidance. It's like Dorothy on the yellow brick road. You remember the Munchkins, they meet her, and they tell her, stay on the yellow brick road. If you want to go home, stay on the yellow brick road, stay on the yellow brick road. But the Munchkins know, because they're smart, as Munchkins tend to be, they know that along the yellow brick road, Dorothy's going to encounter obstacles. She's going to get difficulties. And all of us in our life are really trying to find the yellow brick road. We're trying to find a way to stay on the path that's going to get us home, the path that's going to fulfill us, the path that's going to make us truly happy. That's what Dorothy's looking for. And of course, along the way, you remember there's a part in the story where she runs to the scarecrow and there's the fork in the road. And she doesn't know which way to go, and the scarecrow tries to help her. Although the way that the scarecrow tells her to go is immediately into the way of the witch. See, Dorothy's on the yellow brick road. This psalm writer is on the yellow brick road trying to find out, how do I avoid temptation? In the midst of the battles of my life, how do I stay on my yellow brick road? Lord, guide me. My feet are slipping. That he's using rich metaphors that we're going to unpack today to see how you and I can pray, lead us not into temptation. We're not saying to God, get rid of all temptation. We're saying, lead us not that way. Don't send us that way. And what you're going to see about temptation, what the psalm writer here says, is actually probably more unique about temptation than you've heard before, I think. Because there are the big temptations in life. Murder and stealing, lying, cheating, so on and so forth. And those are always going to be there. But what you need to know is what's underneath all of that first. You need to see the temptation below the temptations. First of all, before I get into this, context is key, as always, in the Bible. And if you know me and you've heard my teaching and preaching, you know that I start with the context first, and then I give you the principles. Let's look at the context. Last week, we looked at David. And the context was David having slept with Bathsheba and done wrong, gotten her pregnant and killed her husband. We had to understand that the same way you need to understand the context of this psalm. If you have your Bibles, follow along with me, because I will be trouncing through the psalm, and I'm going to be saying some verse numbers, and I want you to follow along with me if you can. But first, start at the top. What's the header for this psalm? Do you notice that it says it's a song of Asaph? Okay, Horton hears a who. Horton says who. You should say who. When you hear Asaph, say, who is this? What is an Asaph? Who is it? A person? Is it a thing? What does this mean, a psalm of Asaph? And it tells you a lot when you know who this is. There's about 3 references that we have in the Bible, give or take, Old Testament, to people named Asaph. We don't know exactly if this is who this person is, but we do know what his job was. See, if you're an Asaphite, if you came from that lineage, if you were an Asaph, we'll say this is one guy today, a specific person. If you were this guy, you know what your job was? You were in charge of running the music program in the temple. He was the choir director. He was the praise leader. The Asaphites were the ones who got up during all of the ceremonies, and they would lead everyone else in song. Just like you were led in song just now. They would lead other people in charge of prayers. They were in charge of the liturgy of the worship service. And yet here is this Asaph saying, all in vain I've done this. I look around and all I see is other people advancing and me falling behind. I see other people getting their just dues, but where's mine? He's becoming bitter. He's becoming cynical. He's saying, God, I've done all the right things for you. And look what it's gotten me. See, the reason why I bring up who Asaph is because it's important, because all of you today, all of us, we're at church. There's an Asaph in all of us. You may not have been up here like Victor leading us in worship, but you're worshiping nonetheless. And this is the reality of the Christian heart. Is there's always the temptation to look to God and say, listen, I've done all this. What about me? Why them, not me? And there's a portion I left out from what Lily read. It's a longer psalm, and I left it out because it's a little bit redundant. And he's basically, for time's sake, I left it out. What he's doing is this choir director, the music director of the church, is looking out in the world and saying, all of them are succeeding, yet I'm failing. They're getting what they want in life. I'm getting nothing. It's unfair. Why? He's living a good life. He's doing the right things. And yet God looks at him and says, he looks at God and says, where's my just due? And here's what you need to learn about temptation today. The psalmist, Asaph, gives us a definition of what temptation truly is. And there's two parts to that, but then he also gives us an answer to it, a very pragmatic, practical answer, but then he closes with a very powerful solution to it. I'm going to call it the stumble, the sanctuary, and the salvation. He gets the stumble, he sees the sanctuary, but he senses the salvation. That's a lot of S's. S to do up here. Can't say that 5 times fast. That's a lot of S's. But you have to see this. If you want to know what temptation is in your life and how insidiously creepy it is into your heart, and if you want to root it out, the psalmist points to it. He gives you an answer, but he gives you more than that. He gives you the power to do it. Let me explain what I mean by the stumble. The stumble. He says here in verse 2, if you look, he says, I almost lost my foothold. My feet got slippery. Now, what this is, it's a Hebrew idiom. It's used quite frequently in extra biblical writings, other Hebrew writings. And it's actually used in the Bible too, in other Psalms. And what it means is this: when somebody says, my feet almost slipped, I almost stumbled, he doesn't say I fell, you notice. He says, I almost stumbled. What this idiom, what we would call it in the church today, if we use church language, is to say that this is spiritual backsliding. What he's saying is, the Hebrew idiom is to basically say, God, I almost packed my bags up and turned away from you. God, I wanted to mail it in on you. What he's saying is, God, I'm giving up on you. You notice in verse 1, he says, truly, you're good to Israel. He says, I know it in my head, but it hasn't made a difference in my heart, and I'm ready to bail. Because you haven't come through, God, on what you promised. You see, here's what temptation is. Temptation is when you and I think that we can be God in our lives better than what God can be. And when he's not what we want him to be, we turn and say, I give up, I'm done. The psalmist, Asaph, is saying this is what temptation is. It's when you want to bail. It's when you don't get what you think you deserve and you're ready to turn your back on God. And here's 2 points I want to make about this rather quickly, about what temptation really is. Because it's easy for us, if we come in this room and you hear the pastor talking about temptation, you may think about, well, sexual temptation or moral temptation or so on and so forth. And yeah, those are temptations, but if you don't get to the root of this, you'll never be able to conquer the big ones until you see the small stuff hidden. First, I would say it this way, there's 2 ones. It's simplistically subtle, and it's selfishly self-righteous, temptation is. More S's. You see the theme? There's a theme. It's simplistically subtle, temptation is, as we see from the psalmist. Yet it's totally selfishly self-righteous as well. What do I mean by this? First, temptation. Temptation is simplistically subtle, because look what the psalmist says. He's the choir director. He goes to church every Sunday. He leads others in music, and he said, Lord, I was doing all the right things, yet I almost stumbled. It was that quiet. Temptation started with a whisper. What about you? When are you going to get what you deserve? Why did they get the acclamation you deserve? Why them, not you? You gave to that person, but they gave nothing back to you. And it would have slowly crept up in his life. He's doing all the right things on the surface, and yet he says, in my heart, it was like a subtle whisper. I almost slipped. I almost spiritually backslid, and I didn't even know it was happening. See, this is the way temptation often does this. It creeps into your heart as a whisper, and it grows into a roar. Sure, there's the obvious temptations that we're faced with in life, to steal or not to steal, to cheat or not to cheat, to lie or not to lie. Those are temptations. But the temptation below that is that little voice telling you, you deserve this. You've earned this. Why them, not you? It's your turn now. There's this part in the Screwtape Letters, and I talk about this a couple times, but you can't get better than this. C.S. Lewis, writing in the Screwtape Letters, he's writing a story. Of course, there's two demons going back and forth, and one is called Screwtape. He's the uncle, the older one, the accomplished demon, and he's trying to teach his little nephew how to tempt human beings and get them off the path, knock them off their yellow brick road. And he's trying to teach him how to do it, and he's teaching him all these little tricks and maneuvers and ways to do it. And in Wormwood, who's the nephew, Wormwood says, okay, I got it. I know how I'm going to tempt the human beings. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw at them all the biggest avarices and sins that they can have and entice them with it. And Screwtape, the uncle, says, whoa, whoa, whoa. He doesn't really say whoa, whoa. But he closes with these words that I'm going to put on the screen. I'm going to read. There's a small quote of it in your bulletin, or in your outline, but follow along on the screen if you want. This is what Screwtape says to him. He says, listen, you're going to get to a place where pleasures are not what you need to present to humans. You can be even quieter and more subtle than that. He says, you no longer need a good book to tempt someone, which he really likes, to keep him from his prayers or his work or his sleep. He says, a column of advertisements in yesterday's paper will do just fine. You can make him waste his time, not only in conversation he enjoys with people whom he likes, but in conversations with those he cares nothing about, on subjects that bore him. You can make him do nothing at all for long periods. You can keep him up late at night, not roistering, but staring at a dead fire in a cold room. And he continues on to Wormwood, saying, you will say that these are very small sins. And doubtless, like all young tempters, you are anxious to be able to report spectacular wickedness. But do remember, the only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy. It does not matter how small the sins are, provided that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light and out into the nothing. He closes by saying, murder is no better than cards to tempt someone, if cards can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signpost. So he's saying here is, the best way to get him off the yellow brick road? Do it quietly. Do it so subtly to the music director of the church that he won't even know what hit him. The safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot. You see here the psalmist says, I almost slipped. It was soft under my foot. But temptation is not just something that's quiet, subtle. He also shows that it's selfishly self-righteous, and I know that's repeating myself on purpose. If you look at verse 13, he says this, he says, in vanity I've done all these good things. In vanity. Meaning it was vain. Meaning, I've done all of these good things for you, God, and yet what do I get? See, temptation, when temptation comes in your life, what it's going to try to do is it's going to try to turn the spotlight back onto your heart. It's going to turn the mirror back onto you when you start saying, what about me? What about me? This is a choir director, a music director, a praise leader, a good, devout, church-going man. And he says, look, I've done all these things. I've kept my hands clean, God. Now, you pay me. Now, what do I get out of it? And see, this is the unique thing about the Christian faith, is that we say, yes, you have to repent of your sins. And you do. But here, what he's repenting of is his good deeds. He's repenting not only of his sins, but he's repenting of the good things he's done. Because we know in our heart of hearts that even the good things we do in our life are often tainted with the deepest level of selfishness. And temptation now is coming to him and saying, turn the mirror on yourself. What about you? You sacrificed so much for that person and they haven't given anything back to you. Cut them off. You gave up so much to the church. You gave up so much of your life to other people. What about you? And what he realizes now, he says, all of the good things that I've been doing have been fundamentally about me and about what I can get from God. It's been transactional, not relational. There's a story that I've read from Charles Spurgeon. And I read it one time and butchered it, and I promised forever I'll read it word for word from the page, because I thought I could improvise it, and I can't, because you cannot improvise Charles Spurgeon. He's just too wordy. He says it this way: once upon a time there was a gardener who grew an enormous carrot. He took it to his king and said, "My lord, this is the greatest carrot I've ever grown or will ever grow. Therefore I want to present it to you as a token of my love and respect for you." The king was touched and discerns the man's heart. So as he turned to go, the king said, "Wait. You're clearly a good steward of the earth. I own a plot of land right next to yours. I want to give it to you freely as a gift so you can garden it all." The gardener was amazed and delighted and went home rejoicing. But there was a nobleman at the king's court who overheard all this. And he said, "My, if that is what you get for a carrot, what if you gave the king something better?" The next day the nobleman came before the king, and he was leading a handsome black stallion. He bowed low and said, "My lord, I breed horses, and this is the greatest horse I've ever bred or ever will. Therefore I want to present it to you as a token of my love and respect for you." But the king discerned his heart and said, "Thank you," and took the horse and simply dismissed him. The nobleman was perplexed. So the king said, "Let me explain. That gardener was giving me the carrot, but you were giving yourself the horse." See, he says, the gardener was giving me the carrot for me. You were giving the horse for yourself and what you could get out of it. And the psalmist says, this is what temptation's going to do to you. It'll expose your true motives. It'll say, what about you? Get off the yellow brick road. Go this way. You deserve it. Lead us. Deliver us. So what's the answer? The psalmist gives us two wonderful answers. One that is extremely pragmatic and almost too obvious. I'm going to spend just a minute or so on that and touch on it briefly because I want to get to the last one. He gives us an incredibly pragmatic answer in the sanctuary, but he gives us a wonderful supernatural power in the right hand. Let me explain what I mean. First, the sanctuary. And this is going to be so obvious, and I know most of you are going to say, you're a pastor. Of course you're going to say this. And yes, I am a pastor, so I'm biased. So I will tell you, this is what he does. You notice, when does his attitude start to change? Verse 17. Up until this point, he's bitter, he's cynical, he's looking around, he's comparing his whole life to other people who've got more than he gets, more than he thinks he deserves. He's entitled to stuff, he's worked hard. And now, all of a sudden in verse 17, everything changes. He says, when I went into the sanctuary. Let that sink in for a moment, because he doesn't say when I went into a sanctuary. He's not talking about running around the city and taking refuge in a church and just enjoying the stained glass windows and having a moment of silence. He says, no, when I went into the sanctuary, your place, the Holy of Holies, where you, God, reside. Here's what he's saying. He's saying, God, everything in my life is tempting me to turn my back on you and bail. Nothing in my life has panned out the way that I thought you would deliver on. And right now, all I feel like doing is turning my back on you, packing my bags, and getting out of here. I've done it your way, and it's not working, but I'm going to go to church. And I know I'm the pastor, so I'm biased. I want you all to go to church. I want everybody to go to church. But that's not really what he's saying, because look, if he had gone into this room, do you know what he would have experienced in the sanctuary? He would have seen people singing over here. He would have been seeing somebody pray over here. He would have seen the altar where the sacrifice was made for his behalf. You see, here's the deal. When he faces temptation, he doesn't disengage from the community. He re-engages to the community. He goes to small group. Plug for small groups starting in the fall. Go to one, please. He gets in the church. He serves. He gets in there, he sees, surely he would have heard praying. He was the music leader. You think he could walk into the sanctuary and not have somebody say, hey, brother, sing us a song. Get up on there, lead us. See, here's the key. Temptation is going to say, it's all about you. What he says is, it didn't start to change for me until I went into the sanctuary, until I re-engaged. I could have disengaged and walked away. I could have become bitter and cynical. He says, I re-engaged. And you know what he does in here? In verse 18, 19, he starts to get a perspective. Now listen, some of you may be happily skipping along your yellow brick road these days, and you're not embattled by anything, and there's no temptation to get off the yellow brick road, and you may be coasting along fine. Great. If so, good. God bless you. Keep this outline, because when the hardships come, when the ocean waves rise, and you want to keep your eyes above them, you're going to need to know that it's only going to start to happen when you re-engage into the sanctuary. Because it's in the sanctuary when he says, now I get it. I see that all the stuff that I was valuing out there is fleeting and it'll go away. One day he would say, this psalm writer, I will be a cloud of dust that nobody remembers. Why then, oh why, was I so tempted to leave the one I love? For that. See all this ruination stuff that he says about the enemies and about the other people, and he says, oh, they're gonna waste away. What he's doing is he's getting perspective. He's seeing the forest for the trees. He's up on the mountaintop, seeing the valley, not down in the valley, lost in the muck and mire. He says, I will go back into the sanctuary. It is a very pragmatic thing. Get into community when you're tempted. Get into prayer when you're tempted. Get into church when you're tempted. And again, it sounds so simplistic and so almost obvious. But he says, it didn't change for me until I did that. But that's the pragmatic answer. He gets the sanctuary to start helping him with the temptation that defeats him. He's becoming bitter and cynical when he looks around at everybody else, and he feels like he's getting gypped out of life. But it's in the sanctuary that his perspective starts to change. But here's something really cool. If you look back, in verse 22, here's where he starts to sense the salvation. He starts to get a sense of the salvation that you and I know in reality now. Let me explain this. He says in verse 22, I was a brutish beast before you. And that's another idiom, another metaphor, or whatever you want to call it, to say this. I was stupid. I was ignorant. I didn't know how big you were, God. I didn't know how much control you really did have over my life. You know what a beast acts like? A beast only acts on their own nature. A brutish beast does what they want, when they want, how they want. And he says, up to date, Lord, this is how I've been acting. I've been acting all about myself. I've been wanting all the acclaim and the credit and the due and what I think you ought to pay me. And if you don't pay me, then I'm leaving. And he says, I was a brutish beast before you, but, yet. He says, all along, you were holding my right hand. Now, I say this a lot, if you dozed off, this is the time, come back to me here. He doesn't just say, you held my hand. He doesn't just say, you carried me. He doesn't just say, you gave me a piggyback ride. He doesn't just say, you held onto my foot. He says, you held on to my right hand. You know what he's saying here? For us these days, right and left hands don't really mean that much. But in this time, when you touch somebody with your right hand, or if you touched their right hand, the right hand was the hand of blessing. The right hand was the hand of honor. The right hand was the hand of glory. If you go back to Genesis 48, you'll see this actually throughout all of Genesis. Whenever somebody's getting blessed, and you remember the story, Jacob's blessing the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he's supposed to bless the older one, but when two sons come forward, he crosses his hands. And he puts his right hand on the younger one as a way to say, I bless him, the younger, the weaker. I give him my right hand. And the psalmist here is saying, even when I was a brute beast to you, God, even when I was transactional towards you, even when I demanded of you to deliver for me, you had my right hand all along. You got to know how profound this is. Words can't do justice to what he's really saying here. This, in a word, grace. Pure, unmerited, unequaled, undeserved grace. He says, I didn't deserve it, and temptation almost made me bail on you, but you never bailed on me. And even more than that, you grabbed my hand of honor. You grabbed my hand of blessing throughout all of that. It's absolute grace that he would say this. With boldness, how could he say that the Lord of the universe would hold his right hand and bless him when he was cursing God? God says, that's exactly what I do for all of you. Now, he sensed this salvation in a poetic way. How do you know that when the oceans are rising, when distractions and hardships are trying to knock you off your yellow brick road, when temptation is coming for you to bail on God in your relationship with him, how do you know? How do you know he's got your right hand? It's because in Matthew 27, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken? And forsaken is another way of why have you let me go? God was holding his son's hand on the cross and he let it go. And he let it go for you. So that no matter what you're going through, no matter what temptations there are to bail on him, he says, all along, you can do what you want, but I will be holding your right hand because I had to let go of the hand of my son on the cross. Let me say it this way. Here at Soul Grace, I often try to, in my preaching style at the end, try to give you a picture of what it would look like for Jesus to be on the cross for you, and talk about his suffering and the passion and the dying and what he went through. Let me reverse the paradigm today to make it hopefully anew to you. Look at it from the Father's perspective. What does it mean to lose the hand of his child and to let it go? To forsake his own child? For you? For me? A couple weeks ago, my family and I went on a picnic. And we have two children, as most of you know, a 2-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. And the 2-year-old boy, as most 2-year-old boys are, does not want to sit still, ever. He just wants to explore. So my wife and I, we took the family down to south of the Han River. We set up a little area to have picnic time, and it was earlier in the morning, and as the morning dragged on, more and more people came. It was a beautiful sunny day. And lots of people started coming. You know, if you've ever been to the Han River, you know the camping, how it works. Big tents, big productions, lots of people, lots of stuff going on. And we're eating. Of course, my son does not want to sit still. He's a 2-year-old boy. And you should keep in mind something else about my son. He's fast. He's very, very fast when he gets running. He's extremely fast, faster than I am. And so he wants to run around, and my wife takes first shift, and she's holding his hand and walking him around the campsite and everything, or the picnic site or whatever it is. And she comes back and she's kind of tired from chasing him around for so long, and I know that it's my turn now, so I take him, and he has this little cute thing where he wants to hold daddy's hand and mommy's hand. So it's nice, you hold your little son's hand, and we're walking with him, and we're going around I'm going around the site, and we're getting a little farther away out of eyesight from my wife and my daughter, and I feel something like tickling on my leg, on my left leg, and I just feel something a little ticklish, and it starts to tickle more, and it starts to tickle up my leg. So I decide to look down at my said leg, and I realize there is said spider on said leg. And I do not like spiders one bit. And I didn't know what to do, especially with a spider that's on my leg. So I freak out. A little freak out. I'm in public. I have to keep up a reputation. I can't freak out that much. But I freak out inside. My heart drops. What am I going to do about the spider? So I brush the spider off. Now, I have a moment where I'm looking at the spider saying, listen, am I going to let the spider live so that he may one day crawl up the leg of another person here at the picnic site? Or will I exterminate his life and end it now? So I'm thinking about this and pondering over this for about a couple seconds, and I decide that in that gentle day I will be merciful to that spider, and I shall let him live. I turn around, my son's gone. My heart dropped. Because in the time that I was distracted, of course, my son had let go of my hand and gone off, and he's fast and he runs, and he likes to do weird things and eat weird things, and I don't know where he is. It's the first time ever in my life that I lost him. And it was only about 5 or 10 seconds. But my heart dropped. I didn't know what to do, even as I recount it now. There was nobody I could call. What was my wife going to do? She didn't know where he was. This 5 seconds goes into 10, and it feels like it's 10 hours. And if you've had children, you know how this feels. It really, my heart went down. And I thought, he's going to be crying. He's going to be screaming. He's lost his dad. So I got to find him. And, I turn around after about 10 seconds, and there he is, idly playing with a tree, picking at the bark, which he likes to do, and thinking about whether he wants to put it in his mouth. And I thought surely he would be crying, he'd be heartbroken that he lost the hand of his father. But it was me. It was me, the father, who was crushed. I was crushed for about 5 seconds. Can you imagine what the Lord of the universe was crushed like and how his heart was broken when he gave up his own son's hand and let him go down into hell for what would seem like all eternity because it was timeless and voidless. And he let go of him, and he let go of his son. He forsaked him. And he did it for you. He did it for me. You see, if you ever question whether God's holding your right hand, know this. All the blessings that should have gone to that son go to you. Because that son lost the hand of his father so that you might get it, and not only get it, but get it abundantly more to your right hand. He blesses you with the blessing that that son should have gotten. He honors you with the honor that that son have gotten. He loves you with the love and the care that that son should have gotten. If that doesn't melt your heart, the next time temptation comes to say, look at you, what do you deserve? You can look it square in the eyes and say, I deserve nothing. But he's got my right hand. I need nothing more. Lead us, deliver us. He already has. The cross is proof. And at his right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Go in prayer to God now. Take a moment of silence and reflect on these words.